Hey, welcome back. So, on this journey to read a book from every country, I'm picking up these authors that interest or intrigue me, and Italo Calvino is one of them. I have picked up four additional books by him, having read his Invisible Cities as the fourth video that I posted on this channel to discuss the work, and I did that 2 winters ago in a log cabin by a fire. I'll post that in the description if you're interested, but if you do check it out, hopefully you'll notice some improvements since then. And what I find important about that video, or interesting to talk about, is that I think it's pretty clear that while Invisible Cities interested me, Italo Calvino wasn't necessarily an author that drew me to want to read more of his works. So what changed? What changed? And when thinking about it, it was actually reading his 6 memos for the Next Millennium, which I picked up out of curiosity at a bookstore and just started reading it and decided to buy it because it was so interesting. There are actually 5 essays in here, contrary to the name, and there's a story behind that. But they are literary qualities that Italo Calvino believes are the important focus for the next millennium, or our millennium, because he wrote this in the 1980s, shortly before his passing. Lightness, quickness, exactitude, visibility, and multiplicity. These are qualities you can see in his writing. These are qualities that I feel go beyond the scope of literature, even though part of his thesis and ethos in this book is that there are qualities about literature that only literature can give us. But I think that his work actually transcends the medium in these qualities, and that you can find them in a whole range of media, and even just kind of our general approach to creation of anything in the modern day. But I have to talk I have to do a separate video at some point about 6 memos for the next millennium. It's going to be a book that's with me for a long time, and today I just want to talk about The Baron in the Trees. If you were like me and thought that Italo Calvino is just sort of this postmodern experimental author that's hit and miss, but can't actually write an engaging story, this book will change your mind. It's one of the best told stories I've ever read. Gripping from start to finish, a simple setup, simple on the surface, but quite rich and immersive, and a lot to look into in each particular scenario from an analysis standpoint. Symbolic if you want to get symbolic, or you can just read it as an entertaining story. Incredibly well done. Incredibly well done. I would definitely read it again, even though it's kind of a very linear A to B kind of story. But in essence, it's a young Italian nobleman in the Age of Enlightenment who at the age of 12 decides to rebel against his parents one day and climb up into the trees of his estate and simply never comes back down. He stays up in the trees the rest of his life. And so and by doing this, he still has all these adventures. He has a deadly battle with a cat. He helps the villagers with their hydraulic projects from the trees. He finds creative ways to live up there. He gets engaged in historic events from the trees. He gets involved with bandits. He reads and builds an entire library up in the trees. Each chapter is just this new adventure, and I was just every single chapter wondering what crazy thing is coming next. I haven't revealed all of the interesting and zany scenarios in that. Nothing in this book that happens is fantasy in the sense that it's only realist in the sense that all of this could happen according to the laws of physics and reality that we are aware. But it is quite zany, quite fantastical, and a very interesting choice for the book too and there are two kind of related questions here. One, why the trees? Why couldn't why couldn't Italo Calvino simply have written this as an Italian nobleman leaving his estate to go have all these adventures and not have it be in the trees? It could have just been on the ground, and even more, realist. But he takes Cosimo, this young Italian nobleman, to the level of myth by bringing him up in the trees, and he also chooses to narrate the story from the perspective of Cosimo's younger brother. Cosimo's younger brother has the most normal, stable, predictable life you can imagine, and he is kind of telling us, the reader, about his brother's exploits that he's heard from his brother and other people. So it's technically the novel is in first person, but a lot of it feels like third person. And I think this was a brilliant choice as well, because we have two plays on perspective here. We get a contrast between Cosimo's younger brother viewing him living this insane life in the trees compared to this boring life, and we get Cosimo's different perspective on the world just by the fact that he lives in the trees, and the world's different perspective on him. And perspective is the key here to why the trees. And there is actually, I guess this is a bit I don't think it's that spoily, but later in the book, actually, there is a meeting with Voltaire, and Voltaire makes a remark quite of approval of Cosimo's living in the trees. And I found this so apt because Voltaire, for me, that he appears in this book, and being the Age of Enlightenment and all, Voltaire for me is my entire view of the Age of Enlightenment. He is the only author I've read from that period up to this date. Candide for me was a book that fell right into place and created this direct link in my mind between how we got from the world of Don Quixote to the world of Machado de Asis's posthumous Memoirs of Bras Cubas, for example, or other 19th century literature that I'd read. But yeah, I didn't have that 18th century gap filled until I read Voltaire. And I can actually say something very similar about Italo Calvino. I would say Italo Calvino and Clarice Lispector, for me, are two authors that are actually helping me understand the transition of postmodernism to whatever we are now. So, like, if Borges, some say Borges is the origin of postmodernism, some say it's Machado de Assis, maybe some even say it's Voltaire. I have no idea. You tell me who the origin of postmodernism is. I frankly don't care. What this helped me do, though, was realize, how did we get from Borges? Borges is clearly a different thing than any other author. And how did we get from Borges to now? And the answer to me is Italo Calvino and Clarice Lispector, who both had very different approaches to literature. Clarice being the flame, and Italo Calvino kind of crystallization as their approaches to... That's a metaphor that's in 6 Memos for the Next Millennium, so I won't get into that. But I found it an evocative metaphor, although I don't want to give the impression that Clarice Lispector was all intuition, because from what I understand, she did work very hard and meticulously on some of her books. So, but that's just an aside. I don't want to oversimplify that. But back to Buried in the Trees. So this book is just filled with fantastic characters that are really memorable. There's not too many of them. Like, again, there's it's a nice handful of like 7 to 10 really important characters that stand out. You have a crazy Cosimo's crazy uncle who's obsessed with hydraulics and beekeeping, and dresses like a Turkish man for whatever reason. You'll find out. And of course, there's also a love story. Viola is a girl from the neighboring estate. That's the two families are kind of rivals, but Cosimo, when he goes into the trees, walks right through the trees, the tree branches over to their estate, and so he's not technically on their land, but he's able to interact with this girl that he never would have otherwise. And she immediately tries mischievously to get him to come out of the trees. But this is going to be an important relationship as the book goes on, and Viola is a fantastic character. It's quite easy as the reader to feel a strong affection for her as well as Cosimo. And there's one of their interactions early on is quite good when the first time that he wants to make her aware that he still hasn't come down out of the trees as they're playing with some of the poorer boys from the port. And so I'll just read a short section here. A rustling in the branches, and lo and behold, amid the leaves of a tall fig, Cosimo, panting, stuck out his head. She, looking up with that whip in her mouth, saw him and them, all flattened in the same gaze. Cosimo didn't resist. With his tongue still out, he blurted, "You know, since then I've never come down from the trees." Undertakings based on an inner tenacity have to be mute and obscure. One has only to declare or glory in them, and it all appears silly, without meaning, even petty. So as soon as my brother uttered these words, he wished never to have said them. Nothing mattered to him anymore, and he even felt the wish to get down and put an end to it. All the more when Viola slowly took the whip out of her mouth and said in a kindly tone, "Oh yes? Very clever." I don't know. I love that passage. It was very meaningful to me. And there are a lot of, as the action just is very fast-paced to this book, and again, just very gripped by it, easy to continue reading, but Calvino also puts in these sort of like bits of kind of clever wisdom that makes you pause and kind of go, you know, it's a writing style I do really enjoy. It's almost in the style of like really well-written young adult literature, but with, you know, this book obviously has very adult themes and is almost an all ages book, except for, I guess, some of the, you know, depends on your perspective, I guess. But let's see. Yeah, so, I mean, there's so much I could read or as usual, but it's like, do I want to go in a huge in-depth analysis in this book today? Not really. I more would just want to encourage you, if you are I would just say, if you're at the bookstore and you see this book or library or whatever, just pick it up and start reading the first couple chapters. And if you're hooked, you're hooked. Like, I think you will be. It's just a fascinating story, and there's a lot to think about in it as well, if you want to. So just a great story. Sometimes it's just so refreshing to read just a really well-written story. Doesn't need to be this sort of massive statement on life, but, you know, maybe it is. Why the trees? It's always a question. And I just want to end by riffing on the idea that one of the things about this book that I think really struck my imagination is, and this is something that throughout my life I think subconsciously, I haven't articulated it exactly, but what really appeals to me about certain literature has something in common with what has appealed to me throughout my life playing video games. And I can't deny it that from a pretty young age, I was immersed into video games, or corrupted, depending on your perspective, but I am irrevocably influenced by video games. And that's something that, you know, is relatively new in the world, and it's a medium that I've through my life been very interested in, but not on a superficial level. You know, I've never been about the games where you're just shooting and killing people like Call of Duty, stuff like that. What I like are the more story-driven, the adventure, the open world. Give me a sandbox to explore, but also some sort of like story to uncover, or you know, give me a simple setup, Just like I say in the books I love, give me a simple setup in a world to explore and uncover some secrets if I want to, and to the extent that I want to. And it really gets me thinking about, I'm obsessed with trying to figure out how books and video games are similar and different, and how one can do what the other tries to do, and if they can. It's something that, and I haven't quite found a grounding to start explaining that to myself, or maybe I don't know if I'm afraid to. I don't know what's really stopping me, because I'm so interested in it, and yet I haven't really seriously explored the question, or I guess explored if there is specific literature on how these mediums are different. But I almost feel like it's such. I think I have tried to look into this now that I think about it, but what happens is that there is a certain, like, when you compare video games to books, to literature, you have to ask, like, what kind of books and what kind of video games. And anyone doing any sort of comparative analysis is probably only focusing on a certain subset of each of those massive categories, which have a wide variety of things. And now I don't play video games much anymore, hardly at all. But it's not something that's gone completely away. There's certain narratives and worlds of video games that I bring to reading, and it's often on my mind. And I think Italo Calvino, he builds a world in his literature, and so does Clarice Lispector. And that, what both of them do, appeals to the same part of my brain that a really well-made game world can appeal to me as well. And again, I haven't quite figured this out, but I just feel that it's connecting to sort of this same appreciation of constructing something, and this sort of sandbox of concepts that all interplay and interlace with each other. And this, of course, connects to 6 memos for the next millennium, which I'm not prepared to talk about, but when I am, I'm sure that I'm going to be talking more about video games. And believe me, there's days when I just say, when I talk about this video, I'm scared to talk about video games on this channel, because even though it's something important and I can't deny, I feel that it will make me be taken less seriously. And I think in the same sense, like, the advance of science and technology and literature need to come together. And I think that's also in 6 memos for the next millennium, that we need, not only do we need to find ways to express scientific concepts with poetry, as many, I think, of the greatest modern works are trying to do. Like Cormac McCarthy's The Passenger in Stella Maris engages with scientific and mathematical concepts on a poetic and artistic level that I think no other book has quite achieved. Others have tried it, like Benjamin Labatut, also When We Cease to Understand the World. That was kind of an example of an author trying to do this, I think. But I think Cormac McCarthy did it much more successfully in those books. Although it'll be interesting to think if he actually inhabits or displays these concepts that Italo Calvino talks about in 6 memos. I haven't really thought about that too much, but I've been revisiting Stella Maris and The Passenger this week, thinking about that very concept of, and it's a personal challenge to me. I need to learn more about science. I need to look more into science and appreciate science and mathematics just as much as poetry, because the world we live in now has this grasp of math and science that's making the world strange to us, while we're learning more about it at the same time. And poetry needs to deal with this. Fiction needs to deal with this, I think. And I think Italo Calvino is right on when in Six Memos, let's see if I can find the exact thing he says. He calls it he literally singles it out as the number one thing he wants to see, or wants to. Oh yeah, here it is. Among the qualities I would like to see passed down and embraced by the literature of the next millennium, this one is foremost: a taste for exactitude and intellectual order, in which the intelligence of poetry joins that of science and philosophy as it does in Valerie's prose. So the intelligence of poetry joining that of science and philosophy. That is the challenge of literature today. I think that's also the challenge of video games today. I think it's also the challenge of film. I think it goes beyond the medium, which is what I was trying to, I think, express earlier when I was briefly discussing Six Memos, that even though his ethos is literature can give us qualities that no other thing can, I think he unintentionally gives us a model that can be applied across artistic mediums. And so just as I think literature and poetry have to grapple with changing science, they also have to grapple with technology. And technology and science are not the same thing. And that's an important distinction I have to start making in my mind. But they are both technological advancement, AI, whatever, the video games, all of this stuff that's defining whole modern generations that we have very little understanding of how it influences us and what can be done with it in the future. All of this stuff is absolutely and has to be the realm of poetry and literature. And it is the challenge of literature and poetry now to take up its place as it's got to assert itself onto these things, because I'm not finding the words right now, but I feel like, in the past I've had the concept that math and science are kind of driving out the humanities, and that doesn't have to be the case. What's lacking is that we as people are failing to elevate poetry and literature to the same heights and to try to bring them together. That was my best shot. I hope I will articulate all this better in a future video, but that's what these videos are for, to kind of, start a playground. It's a playground for ideas, and I'm just sharing it with you because it's better, I think, than just keeping it to myself, because you always have the option not to watch. So, yeah, and everyone on this channel who's commented or whatever has been great. Nobody's been rude. So far, I have absolutely no complaints about the YouTube community, and that I've been a part of here in a limited way. So I do appreciate all you who are subscribing and following and watching to whatever extent you desire, whether it be, one video here and there, one video ever, all my videos, whatever. I appreciate it. So, all right, we'll see you next time. Probably continuing with the reading around the world, and of course a big poetry one coming up. So take care.